We are finishing up John chapter 8. Not this week, next week. Well, we're going to look at the last section here for 2 weeks. And the reason why is because there's probably a million things going on in this last section here. It's kind of been going on the whole time, and everything is just kind of swirl and revolve together. Everything that Jesus has been talking about kind of coming to this final moment. But at least in this section, there's at least two different things going on. So we're going to spend 2 weeks looking at it, this week and next week. First time we go through it this time, we're going to look at something that is definitely behind what Jesus is saying. John the Apostle recognizes that it's behind what Jesus is saying. The problem is that the Pharisees at the time don't get it at all. And so they just miss this point completely. So we'll talk about what conversation Jesus has with the crowds, with the Pharisees, and what he's telling them outright next week. But what's behind the scenes, what Jesus is doing that they don't pick up on, that's what we're going to talk about this week. So we're going to talk about honor, we're going to talk about glory, and that comes, as Jesus would say in this section, in the form of being a servant. And they don't pick up on that at all. That's not their form of glory, that's not their form of honor. They're all about keeping the law, but Jesus comes to serve. So we'll see that in this passage. And we'll see it as something completely oblivious to the Pharisees. They won't pick up on it at all. Jesus will work with them on what they can pick up on. We'll talk about that next week. So for this week, we'll skip everything in this section that really has to do with Abraham. And you might be saying, isn't that the whole section? Like, isn't this just filled with references to Abraham? And isn't that what he's talking about? And it is. And so that's why we'll talk about it next week. But it's the only thing that the Pharisees really want to deal with. What we'll talk about this week is the part that the Pharisees or the crowds, they really don't want to deal with. And because they don't want to deal with it, they're not seeing all the connections. So we'll skip over the Abraham stuff. We will get to it next week. I'm not putting it aside completely. Just know we're going to talk about honor, glory this week, and I'll show you why as we go. Here's the context if you haven't been with us for John chapter 7, John chapter 8. So this is the last day of the Feast of Booths, all the way back from John chapter 7, verse 37. On the last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood up and cried out, and then he starts teaching, and then he teaches again, come chapter 8, and he's still teaching on the last day of the festival, all the way through the end of chapter 8. So Jesus has just said to the crowds, why do you not understand what I say? And then he tells them, it's because you cannot bear to hear my word. In other words, why do you not understand when Jesus says he's the light of the world? Why do you not understand when Jesus says, I am from above, you're from below? When he tells them where he's from and where he's going, they don't understand that. When he tells them, you cannot come where I'm going, they don't understand. When he talks about testifying to himself and that his testimony is true, they don't understand. When he says that he can judge and his judgment's just, they don't understand. When he says that unless you believe I am he, you will die in your sins, they don't understand that. They don't understand that he was sent by God from heaven. They don't understand that God is with him. And they don't understand that he's telling the truth. And the reason he says, in this immediate context then, that they don't understand is because they don't follow God, they follow Satan, or they follow the devil. That's the attack that Jesus has just laid in front of them. You don't understand all these things that I'm saying, and the reason you don't understand all these things that I'm saying is because you don't actually follow God, you follow Satan. So this is the crowd's response. We're picking it up, John chapter 8, verse 48. This is the crowd's response to Jesus saying to the crowd, or to the Pharisees in the crowd, you follow your father, the devil, and you're here to do his will. This is what the Jews say in response, verse 48. The Jews said to him, or answered him, are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and you have a demon? Now, the Jews believed that the Samaritans were apostate. So they believed that the Samaritans followed a false god. They worshipped a false god on their false mountain. And so he's essentially saying, shouldn't we now at this point say that you're false, that you're worshiping a false god? Shouldn't we now at this point say that you're crazy? The term, you have a demon, okay, and today if we said to someone, you have a demon, they would think that we're either crazy They would probably think we're crazy to talk in that sort of way. Or super religious people would maybe be freaked out by something like that. They may not necessarily be saying that Jesus is literally demon-possessed. They may just be using it as a reference to say, you're crazy. You're a nut job. When demons possess people, they act crazy, out of their mind. They talk crazy, and they do crazy things, and it doesn't make any sense. And so they're saying here, are we not right in saying that, number one, you follow a false god, you worship illegitimately, and number two, you're just crazy? Aren't we right in saying that at this point, is what they're asking him? The crowd has already asked Jesus this. Back earlier in the festival, John chapter 7, verse 20. This is on a different day of the festival probably, but they already asked him once, or they already said to him, you have a demon, when he says, you all are seeking to kill me. He tells them, you all are seeking to kill me, and they're like, nah, you have a demon. In other words, you're crazy. Nobody's seeking to kill you. Except for that they were. So this is not the first time during this festival that they have accused him of having a demon. Here's Jesus' response, verse 49. Jesus answered, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. And then the first half of verse 50, yet I do not seek my own glory. So Jesus says, number one, I'm not crazy. Okay, I don't have a demon. What's really happening is that I'm working to honor my Father. Now, in the immediate context, Jesus has just told them, you don't actually follow God. You follow Satan. So here, again, he's making this distinction between himself and them. I honor the Father. I honor God. You don't. You follow Satan. You desire to do his will, but I follow God. The way that they dishonor Jesus, he says, you dishonor me, is that they don't believe him. They call him crazy, thinking that he has a demon. They call him a Samaritan. In other words, they call him a non-Jew or a non-child of God. So in response to Jesus telling them the truth about who he is, they dishonor him by not believing a word of it, by telling him that he's crazy, and by distancing themselves from him. That's their response. Notice what Jesus says, though, that he doesn't seek his own glory in verse 50, the first half. He says, yet I do not seek my own glory. And in the verse before it, in verse 49, he says, I do honor the Father. This is a major distinction between him and the Pharisees as well, because the Pharisees seek their own glory. He says, I'm not here to seek my own glory. I'm here to honor the Father. That's it. I'm here to honor the Father's wishes. I'm here to do what he wants. I'm here to say what he says, and I'm here to do what he does. And be his workmanship, if you will. And I'm here to honor the Father. Now, this is where Christians, I think, sometimes get hung up. This is where definitely people who live in the world who are not Christians get hung up. Because there's a lot of people out there that think that if I spend my life honoring God, I'm just going to miss out. I'm going to miss out on fulfillment of some sort. People who don't want to wait to have sex until they're married. They think, if I wait to have sex until I'm married and honor God that way, I'm just going to miss out. I'm going to miss out on all that fun and pleasure and fulfillment. I mean, why would anybody want to do that? What we don't often see that comes with things that look tempting or pleasurable is that there's destruction on the back end that we cannot foresee. There's destruction that lasts long into when you do get married, that comes from the way you used to be sexually before you were married. And we think that by honoring God and staying pure until we're married, we're somehow missing out. I could tell you, you're not missing out. All you're doing is causing damage later on, difficulties and hurdles and mess in a relationship later that's supposed to be pure, and now you have to figure out how to do that. Now you have to figure out how not only not to be sexually active with other people, but then also not to have those memories that stay and never go away, bleed into the marriage that you have one day. We often live thinking if we honor God with our bodies, the way He told us to live, we're just going to miss out. But we don't see the domino effect later on. We often think that if I honor God with my body, I'm just going to be on a diet the rest of my life. So I'm never going to get to eat what I want to eat, and I'm never going to get to enjoy life that way. And what we don't realize is that our physical health is also connected to our mental health, is also connected to our spiritual health. You can't separate your physical health from the rest of your life. It doesn't work. And so when we fail to honor God with our bodies in the things that we eat, or the way that we don't exercise or self-harm or whatever else, what we don't realize is that that has an effect on every other area of our life. We think that if we honor God, we'll somehow experience less enjoyment. We believe that lie all the time. Some people think that if I honor God, if I really honor God with my words, I'll never say what I actually feel. I'll never get out what I actually believe. So why would I want to hold my tongue? Why would I want to be slow to speak? When so many people in our culture today are patted on the back and praised for saying the first thing that comes to their mind and wearing their heart on their sleeve. And we don't want to honor God with the things that we say. But the reality is sometimes our thoughts are evil. Sometimes our feelings are inappropriate. Sometimes there's bitterness. Sometimes we want to abuse people. And so when we just go crazy with the things that we say, it doesn't actually honor God, number one, but what we don't realize is that by God setting boundaries for us to honor Him with our words, He keeps us from turning from the victim or the abused to the abuser. He's trying to keep us from being the abuser to other people, and yet we think that we're missing out because we don't get to say what we want when we want. But we don't see it as God protecting us from becoming the very thing we hate, which is the abuser. We do this all the time. There's finances and time and trust where we think that if we just live our lives completely solely to honor God, we'll just miss out. But there's always some slight twist that we're missing. Let's just say for a second some of these things were true. Let's just say for a second that realistically, if you were to honor God with your body before marriage, you would have less sex. In fact, you would have none before marriage. So let's just say there's even a little part of it that is somewhat true. If that's what you're seeking is fulfillment. The next question becomes, are you willing to trade those things for eternity? So are you willing to trade dishonoring God now, a pleasure that might satisfy you today and will be back tomorrow? Are you willing to sacrifice that so you can have it now and sacrifice eternity because you don't want to honor God in this life? That's long term. That's big picture. This is what Jesus says. This is how He chooses to live. He says, I don't have a demon, but I honor my Father, and yet you dishonor me, and yet I do not seek my own glory. We're talking about honor, talking about glory. Jesus comes, the demonstration that He gives is, I do everything to honor God, and I'm not seeking my own glory. Here's the exchange that happens, the rest of verse 50. Here's the exchange that happens when Jesus makes that choice. I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it, and He is the judge. So here's the exchange that happened. Jesus comes here to honor the Father, spends His whole life here honoring the Father. I'm going to live my life to honor the Father, no matter what it costs. And as a result, the Father then glorifies the Son. See how that works? It's not about if I spend my life honoring God, I'm just going to have less or be less or not have enough. There's a give and take here. God is for Jesus and He's for God. And together, they honor and glorify each other. We'll come back to that as we go. We'll come back to that in a minute because Jesus is going to repeat that later. And that's going to be kind of the clutch of what we're talking about today. Next conditional statement that Jesus gives, verse 51. Truly, truly, I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. The last conditional statement was in verse 31. We talked about it. If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples. This is the next conditional statement. Notice it's getting broader. In verse 31 of chapter 8, Jesus is speaking to the people in the crowds. You all this and you all that. Now listen to it broaden to third person. If anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. It's still that third-class conditional statement that we talked about. If you don't know what that is, it's basically a conditional statement in the Greek that's undefined as far as the result. We don't know whether it's going to go positive. We don't know whether it's going to go negative. The jury's out. The question is, do you keep the word of Jesus? When you keep the word of Jesus, then you will never see death. It's not a for sure thing that you're going to keep the word of Jesus, and it's not a for sure thing that you're not going to keep the word of Jesus. It's a question mark. You got to make a choice. Probably you should go back when trying to understand this conditional statement to what Jesus said at the last festival. So in John chapter 5, verse 24, Jesus is in Jerusalem. He's at the festival. Then in John chapter 6, he goes up north into the Galilee area, feeds 5,000, walks on water, does all that stuff, then goes back to the festival in Jerusalem, a different festival in Jerusalem in chapter 7. So last time Jesus was in Jerusalem, this is what he said in John chapter 5, verse 24. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life. He does not come into judgment, but is passed from death to life. So that's what he said at the last festival. This is what he says at this festival. If anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. In other words, he'll never see judgment, which he's already said to them at the last festival. Keep the word of Jesus, and you will never see judgment, which is talking about, which he references here as death. Now, the Pharisees think that he's literally talking about death. So that's the direction that they're going to go with this. They apparently weren't there for his teaching in chapter 5, or maybe they were and they don't remember. Here's their response, verse 52. The Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. They were like, we thought you were crazy before, and then they asked him if he was crazy. Now they're telling him, now we know you're crazy. Abraham died, as did the prophets, yet you say, if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. So they're literally thinking literal death, not talking about literal death, talking about spiritual death, talking about judgment after you die as a result of your sinfulness. Me, judgment after I die as a result of my sinfulness, unless I keep the word of Jesus. Here's the next questions they ask because they're still rolling on that train, verse 53. Are you greater than our father Abraham who died? And they assume he's probably going to say yes to that, or at least that's what he's saying up to this point. Are you greater than the prophets who died? That also seems to be what he's saying, and so they ask a third question. Who do you make yourself to be? So they're pretty sure he's saying he's greater than Abraham. They're pretty sure he's saying he's greater than the prophets, and yet he's telling them they will never see death. So they're like, okay, Jesus, at this point we need you to just tell us plainly. Stop beating around the bush. Don't give us another analogy. Don't slide this one way or the other. Answer our question. Tell us plainly. They ask this question, who are you? And he gives this answer in verse 54. Jesus answered, if I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. Now remember the context that I said at the beginning. This is the Feast of Booths. This is one of the three festivals, the last of three festivals during the year, one of three festivals where all of Jerusalem men, at least, are required to travel, and a lot of them would travel with their families too. They come to Jerusalem. They stay in booths. They festival for a whole week. On the last day of the festival, the great day of the festival, Jesus is in the temple, and he stands up and he starts talking crazy. And when they start listening to what he's saying, and they're like, okay, we're here to worship Yahweh. We came to this festival every year to worship him and to worship no one else, because in the Jewish belief system at this time, there's one God worthy to be worshipped. Every other God is not really a God. There's only one God, and he's the one who's to be worshipped. And they came here. They've been celebrating this festival now for over 1,000 years. Every year for over 1,000 years. And he comes and he says, if I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father, whom he's been referring to as the God that they are at this festival to worship. My Father who glorifies me, of whom you say he is our God. So in a nutshell, he's saying, the one that you're here to worship, the God that you're here to worship, he's my Father, and not only that, he glorifies me. That's unbelievable. Like, who stands up in the temple and says that? Especially when they're calling you crazy. Now, he's already told the Pharisees essentially that they're illegitimate children. They think they're children of God, but he tells them that they're illegitimate children. They're slaves to sin, and as a slave, therefore, they're to be cast out of the house. He's the legitimate child. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. But here's what Jesus also is, and this is what's in the background that the Pharisees are not getting, the crowds are not getting. Turn to Isaiah chapter 42. While Jesus is the Son of Promise, he is also the servant. And you will hear exactly what he's trying to describe when he stands in this festival and he starts teaching. Starting in Isaiah chapter 42. Somebody that the Jews, the crowds, never thought that the Messiah would be, but they didn't understand the prophecies from Isaiah. Listen to this from Isaiah chapter 42. Maybe you'll hear this in the background of what Jesus is saying. This is starting in verse 1. The prophet Isaiah, speaking the words of God, says this, "Behold, my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry aloud or lift up his voice or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. He will not grow faint or be discouraged till he has established justice in the earth, and the coastlands wait for his law. Thus says God the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives the breath to the people on it and spirit to those who walk in it. He says, I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people." And this is where the servant of the Lord shifts in the book of Isaiah to a person instead of a nation. Because just in the last chapter, Isaiah chapter 41, Israel, the nation, is the servant of God. Not a person. A nation is the servant of God. Except for in this chapter, it switches from a nation to a person. And it's found right here in John chapter 42, verse 6. And the prophet Isaiah says, the words of the Lord, I will give you, singular, as a covenant for the people. In other words, an individual, a person, a one thing as a covenant for the people. And the next phrase is this, a light for the nations. This is why John the Apostle is probably so fixed on the fact that Jesus is a light in the darkness, and why he stands up in this same festival and says, I am the light of the world. Listen to verse 7 in Isaiah chapter 42. To open the eyes of the blind, to bring out the prisoners from the dungeon, from the prisons, those who sit in darkness. And if you're familiar with John's gospel, you'll know that when we start John chapter 9, the very first story is the story of Jesus healing the man born blind. So John the Apostle understands that Isaiah chapter 42 is what Jesus is really talking about. He's going to just line these stories up so that you and I don't look back and miss Isaiah chapter 42, that Jesus is the servant, and he's the servant of God. But listen to what's crazy as we go forward in Isaiah chapter 42. Listen to this next verse. This is why it doesn't make sense for Jesus to be anything else besides God. This is why it doesn't make any sense for Jesus to be anything else besides the second member of the Trinity. This is Isaiah chapter 42, verse 8. The words of the Lord say this: I am the Lord, that is my name. My glory I give to no other, nor my praise to carved idols. Behold, the former things have come to pass. The new things now I declare. Before they spring forth, I tell you of them. So in Isaiah chapter 42, Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament, the one who the Jews are at this festival to worship, that God says, I am the Lord, that is my name. My glory I give to no other, nor my praise to carved idols. So in the Old Testament, God gives his glory to nobody. And yet Jesus comes saying, if I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me. And he says, it is the one whom you say he is our God. He cannot any clearer be saying to them, there is only one God in the Old Testament who receives glory, and he shares that glory with no one. So if Jesus is just a man, it makes no sense. Jesus is crazy if he's only a man to say that the God of the Old Testament, the one whom they're at this festival to follow, gives glory to him. To glorify is simply to honor. It's to worship in some cases. It's to praise. Do you get how this adds to the distinctions that he's already been saying? I am from above. You are from below. I am not like you. If Jesus were just a man, he would fit in the category of Romans 3:23, where Paul says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Not only does Jesus not fall short of the glory of God, he says, in the festival, on the last day, God the Father glorifies me. If he were just a man, he would be the one glorifying God. Because in Isaiah chapter 43, Isaiah writes that God speaks of his children, whom he created for his glory. So in our humanity, we're created to glorify God. And yet, Jesus says, the one you came to serve, he glorifies me. Just flips it on its head. We're not going to finish the rest of this. We're going to stop there. The point is, when you and I come singing, when you and I come speaking the truth, when we share the gospel, when we study our Bibles to know who Jesus is, every time that we come honoring, exalting Jesus with our life, in our families, with our kids, with our finances, with our time, with our energy, you get that every time we spend our days honoring the Son, we literally join with the divine. We join with the Father to glorify the Son. So if Jesus is telling us that the Father glorifies the Son, then everything that you and I do in our own life to glorify Jesus Christ, the Son, we literally join with the first member of the Trinity in his own action to glorify the Son. When we believe, when we have faith, when we trust him, the Father believes in Jesus. He trusts him. He has faith in him. We join with that action. It's divine action to glorify the Son. Notice also what Jesus says at the beginning. If I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. Honor yourself, praise yourself, worship yourself, exalt yourself. This is what the world tells us. You could do it if you want, your choice. It will not get you what you want. There's always a twist that you can't see. We have to figure out how to join in with the Father. We have to figure out how to join in with the Father to glorify the Son. Why? You say, Anthony, why bother? Why bother joining in with the Father to glorify the Son? This is the culmination of the work of the servant in the book of Isaiah. This is Isaiah chapter 53, starting in verse 2. For he, that is the servant, grew up before him, that's Yahweh, that's the Father, that's God. For he grew up before him like a plant, like a root out of dry ground. He, the servant, had no form or majesty that we should look at him, no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken and smitten by God, afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. We all like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all, the servant. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb he is led to the slaughter, like a sheep that is before the shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away, and as for his generation who considered that he was cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgression of my people. They made his grave with the wicked and with the rich man in his death, although he had done no violence and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days, and the will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see this and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul to death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sins of many, and he makes intercession for the transgressors. The promise to those who glorify the Son, the promise to those who keep his word, is that you'll never see death. That he takes our iniquity, that he takes our sin, that he intercedes on behalf of us to the Father. Don't punish them. I took their punishment. That you'll never be judged by God for your sins because he paid for them. You should walk with confidence that you're secure, that when you believe, promises of God will secure you for all eternity. But it should change the way that you live, to honor God in your families, to honor God with your bodies, to honor God with your words, with your finances, to honor God. So Scott's going to come up here and he's going to sing another song real quick, because one of the ways that we honor Jesus is to sing. We do it every Sunday, and I think that Saturday, I guess we're here on Saturday. Every time we sing in honor to Jesus, that every time we step up and glorify him, we're literally joining with the Father to say we believe, we're having faith, we honor him, we glorify him, and as a result, we will never see death. So Scott's going to come sing, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you, Scott. We are in the precarious situation to honor the Father in heaven and also to glorify the Son. We're not God. We're not part of the Trinity. So they have their own little inner working, but we get to do both. To honor the Father with what we do and say, and also to glorify the Son. Not just when you sing praise, but when you're at your workplace and when you're with your family, to glorify Jesus Christ. To glorify Jesus Christ with your kids. Behind closed doors when you pray, to glorify Jesus Christ. To speak nowadays, maybe to debate with people about politics, glorify Jesus Christ. Doesn't mean you can't have the conversation, but glorify Jesus Christ. To strangers, to people who don't agree with you or you don't agree with, gotta find a way to glorify Jesus Christ. Why? Because that's what the Father does. Glorifies Jesus Christ.